Wassail, fellow Mercians! My name is Marcus Petz, and I'm on the acting Witan of Mercia, which is our government, and I wish to tell you a little bit about Mercia, the what, when, and where of our glorious country, Mercia. The question I'm often asked is, what is Mercia? When are we taking it from, and where is it? So I'm going to give some information about that. It's not clear when we talk about Mercia if we mean Mercia of the past or Mercia of the present, and what of Mercia of the future. Here are a few slides that can answer those questions, and you will see in the slides some pictures from our history. You have Ethelfleda, the Lady of the Mercians, on the left. Then you have the Mercian supremacy. As you can see, the actual influence of Mercia waxed and waned over that time. And then you have King Offa, perhaps one of the most famous Mercians that has existed, and he was quite powerful in influencing other places and also in protecting Mercia from the ravages of the Welsh, the Wessexans, Northumbrians, or other would-be usurpers or people who would like to take control of Mercia. He was no angel himself, but that's something for another story. And lastly, you can see the personal emblem of Leofric, Earl of Mercia, and this has been adopted by the Mercian Regiment, which is currently serving in the British Army. And prior to that, there was a Mercian Brigade who used a very similar symbol as their cap badge. And the reason for picking that is because Mercia still has a resonance, even in these days today, for the army units as they tried to put them together, and they found what did they have common in making and naming such a unit, and they decided that Mercia was that thing. So Mercia still exists as a concept, and Mercia still exists as a place. So when was it founded and did it disappear? Well, we have to go back into the mists of time. We have to go back into the Dark Ages. At this time, we may find a scarcity of written historical evidence about exactly what happened. You have to think that the Roman Empire has declined. In 410, it's believed that that's when the Roman Empire left Britain. The Britons who were left became Romano-Britons. They weren't Romans anymore. So they had a mixture of different languages and cultures. Latin was still prevalent, but so were Celtic spoken languages. Brythonic is often the way that they're referred to in general. But they faced the depredations of surrounding groups, the Scotti from Ireland and the Picts from the north. So these groups took advantage of there no longer being a strong Roman army in order to raid, trade, and do what people do when there's an opportunity. The people of the time obviously felt threatened, and they thought, what can we do about this? And across all of the ex-Roman Empire, it was quite common to then make deals with mercenaries, other tribes, to come and settle and to perhaps defend against raiders and more raiders. And this is what we believed happened in respect to Mercia. So there were three groups that came to Britain. We have the Utes, Jutes, the Saxons, and the Angles. And you can see roughly where they've come from in the small picture at the top. And we also know that they came in different waves at different times. And our understanding is that Vortigern, a king of the Britons, that doesn't mean there's only one king of all of Britain. There may have been several kings of Britain even at the same time, had a council, and in that council it was decided that they wished people to come from these places and they would be given food. So this is our understanding. Exactly when they came and who came and how the deals were made, all of that is lost in time. And there were also some rivalries, and there were also some disputes about whether the people were treated fairly. And the upshot of it was that we believe in 515 King Aisel of Anglia, so he was a king in Anglia already, came over with his people, and he moved with those people to what we would now call as East Anglia and Mercia, and those people then spread into Mercia, and gradually the kingdom became Mercia as we understand it. So if you look at the Mercian royal family, they try and trace their history back to Aisel. However, if you try to look back further through the royal family, what we have of the records, we don't have much of a record. So we have Beowulf, the perhaps first poem or well-known poem, which has come from this time, seems to have a genealogy in it. But unfortunately, if you look at that genealogy and some other genealogies, it's mixed in with fiction. So much as our current Westminster Parliament is full of hyperbole and perhaps lies and exaggerations, so are these great bardic tales that we have, great poetic works, which have elements of truth in them, but they also have elements of fantasy, elements of kennings, where poetic ways of describing things are used, and they also have religious aspects that are brought in, or significant figures that are brought in, which are complete fantasy. They didn't exist at the time, they weren't real people, and this is what we find in the family tree if we go back further. So it's unlikely that Odin was truly a god that started the Mercian line, but if we go back that far, it becomes a bit sketchy. If we come forward, we're more sure because we have actual historical records in other places. However, what we can say is from the archaeological record is we can find evidence of what languages were used broadly in Britain, and we can find evidence of the people that died from material culture. As our science has got better, we can do DNA analysis, and we can do isotopic analysis on those finds, and we can identify where they've come from and what the connections are. So in the case of dead people in cemeteries, we can look at them and say, well, these show a warrior culture, and where they show stuff that must have come from that area of the world. So we have a strong evidence that happened, but the exact dating is not so clear yet. Again, the hypothetical new find can answer a question very well, and it's likely to come from archaeology. As archaeology improves, as DNA technology improves, as we do better analysis on what we found, we will have a better picture of who came when and how that worked. Nevertheless, Mercia was founded, and it went through various phases. Sometimes it was more powerful, sometimes it was less powerful. One of its less powerful moments, it was annexed by Edward the Elder of Wessex. It was no longer considered a kingdom, it was considered as an earldom, with an earl or an ealdorman. Now, you can look at this in different ways. You can say, well, that's it, Mercia's gone. Or you can say, no, Mercia was still a kingdom. It just happened at that moment that the kingdom had entwined with Wessex, and the royal families had entwined with Wessex. And it's difficult to tease all that out. It needs quite a lot of analysis and understanding. Nevertheless, Mercia is a concept that continued to exist, and Mercia continued to exist through the Norman conquest, with the last Earl, Edwine, dying in 1071. The Normans then, in order to deal with rebellions, which happened in various places, Area of the Wake is one that we know of, there's a Mercian rebel, decided that they would break Mercia up into smaller administrative parts. This was for various reasons, I don't go into that now, but the end point is that Mercia still exists today, and we're not aware of Mercia formally being abolished or formally got rid of. So our belief is that Mercia exists. I believe it exists, and the Mercian culture certainly exists. There's a Mercian people, we have a culture, and with that means we have an existence, much as we can find with many indigenous people around the world. So you could find various dates which you could look at around that to modern times, but the most important one is the 29th of May 2003. The legal independence of Mercia was declared, and Mercia, as an organic democracy, has an acting Witan. So it no longer is a kingdom, it no longer is an earldom. We do not have that feudal structure in Mercia, and our constitution allows us to develop a different way of operating. Whether you can call us a country, a republic, is up for debate, but we're certainly not a kingdom, we're not an empire. So, where is Mercia? As I explained in history, Mercia, when it originally began, was not clearly defined, and this means that the Mercians who came brought the concept of Mercia with them, and we are not clear exactly how Mercia developed in the very early times, but we can be sure that they lived in what we would now call East Anglia and Mercia. And if we come over the millennium or so, then we would say now that Mercia is roughly where the Midlands is. So what is the Midlands? Well, we can look and find some recent definitions of how people regard the Midlands and how people would regard Mercia with the county boundaries. So we have the Nuts regions. Now this is an EU created administrative procedure to compare regions across all of Europe. And when that was created, the national governments were asked in each country how would they like to define the regions. And in the British case, it was taken from a historical report called the Redcliffe Maud Report, which had been made in the 60s, where they tried to make provinces in Britain. And at that time, we had the concept of East and West Midlands, and that led to the East and West Midlands regions. You can see if you look at that original report that East Anglia was bigger. It took the south of the county of Lincolnshire in, and it also excluded the north of the county of Lincolnshire. And those are clearly part of Mercia. So you can see the numbered map is where we consider Mercia to exist. But what about the people that actually live there? Where do they consider Mercia to live? Well, we haven't surveyed everybody in Mercia as was, but a survey was done on Reddit. And Reddit asked 100 different Britons where they regarded the Midlands. So Midlands being a proxy for Mercia, well, we can see where that map is roughly. And we can see that pretty much all of the counties that we've listed are included in Mercia. There's a couple of outlying ones. So, for example, some people in Norfolk considered that they lived in the Midlands. And you've also got the fact that almost nobody in Middlesex considered they lived in the Midlands. And this is because of the dominant effect of London and maybe other influencing factors. So, for example, the census splits Britain also into regions or provinces for administrative purposes. And in their case, Norfolk is considered in the Midlands, as is Suffolk. So there is some dispute about exactly where the boundaries lie, but we have to take it from somewhere, which is what we do. So on the previous slide, I showed a number of maps and I showed where we consider Mercia to be. So the smaller divisions, which were numbered, are called the shires of Mercia. Mercia is composed of historic counties. These are better termed as shires, the shires of a given shire town or city. And this is originally how they were conceived. The Normans tried to regularize the system and tried to alter that to make counties. So we have the term historic counties, which go back over various times. And we've had modern attempts to try and make new counties, which haven't worked, like Humberside. The signs were defaced because people didn't recognise it. Rutland, again, people didn't wish Rutland to be abolished. They had an affinity with those areas. However, the county boundaries have changed over time. The boundaries have changed. So when do we take them from? At present, we take the county boundaries as existing at the Declaration of Independence. And then we take an irredentist position on the areas around Mercia. So what does that mean? Irredentist means that if we look through history, we can find that some neighbouring areas were not part of Mercia, and now they are. And some parts of Mercia are no longer parts of Mercia as the counties have become contiguous. That means that all of the little, perhaps, areas of land that were owned by one county from feudal times in a different county are now made to say, well, they all, if they're within one area, it's the same county. So this is the basic position that we take. Now, this means that some areas which are around Mercia may have been lost, and those people may wish to consider themselves as Mercians. So we could also ask areas that are within Mercia if they don't wish to consider themselves as Mercians. So a good example of that is Bristol. So in our conception, Bristol is part of Gloucestershire and it is part of Mercia. But if the Bristolians decide that they don't wish to be part of Mercia, then they are free to decide and to secede from Mercia. That's perfectly within our constitutional arrangements. And similarly, Monmouth is not part of Mercia, but it could be. If the people of Monmouth decided they wished to be part of Mercia, and Monmouth Shire decided democratically as an organic democracy that it didn't wish to be part of Wales and it wished to be part of Mercia, and there were no issues over that, disputes, border disputes or problems, then that change could happen. However, we also support bioregionism. So we would see the geomorphological boundaries of rivers and seas, which make natural boundaries, could be taken into account for altering administrative areas to fit in with those. Again, it would be by consent of the residents, and this would be done on a logical, sensible basis. And now it also means that new counties could arise. So, for example, Stamfordshire, which has been talked about in the past. But we would be cautious about any step because people have to feel an affinity with the place. They have to want to do that. There has to be a good logical reason for doing it. We're not just going to create counties arbitrarily, as the Normans appeared to do. Here you can see the shires of Mercia as we conceive them, and you can see that most of them have the name shire. There are a couple that do not have the name shire. So, for example, Middlesex and Rutland do not have the name shire. So they have been created with a slightly different concept. You can also see that the size of the shires varies a little bit. So you have Lincolnshire, which is quite a big shire. Now, if you look into the history of any one of these places, you can find reasons why they are so shaped. So in Lincolnshire's case, the north of Lincolnshire historically was a kingdom called Lindsey, and Lindsey is now part of Mercia. In Middlesex's case, it was named after the Middle Saxons, so that's the origin of the name. Nevertheless, the concept here of a shire town and the shire around it is something that seems to work quite well. It stood a long test of time, and this is something that we would consider as a good way of organising local government. If you wish to know more, please read the Constitution, and if you wish to become a citizen of Mercia and you're not already, then please contact us. We'll be happy to hear from you, and happy Mercia Day to everyone.